When we spoke of London, I thought that wherever you go, there you are. Does that make
Oh,
any sense?
that, well, I feel like we don't really have that many options because,
Yeah.
wherever you are mentally or wherever you are physically, that's where you are. I just know that when I travel, when you're in the real place, the physical place, there's a presence about the place that is just so overwhelming your senses. I mean, I've seen so many pictures of art in the Louvre Museum, or I've seen, pictures of the Mona Lisa or the Winged Victory, or just so many pictures of Paris and, you know, Istanbul or Manhattan. But when you're physically walking around there, it's a very different experience. I mean, like you were saying in another episode, when you were in London, walking around the parks and walking around the bookstores, you were just really immersed in the experience.
Yeah, I think that funny about Istanbul, because Moscow it's kind of cold, right? London and Paris they don't have a coast, but Istanbul has a sea coast, and that's why I probably chosen him. If it was up to you where to live, you'd probably chosen the
Yeah,
place.
well, it's good. It's the crossroads of Europe and Asia, and so the Bosphorus or the Dardanelles is where the ships would come through back and forth and do trade. And so there's half of Istanbul that's on the Asian side, and half of it's on the European side. And when you travel there, even in the 20th century, what century are we in? Are we still in the 20th century? Okay.
21st, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, we're in the 21st century. Okay. Okay. I'm a little bit of a dinosaur. Like sometimes I forget what century we're in. But I'm saying when you travel, there's still old ancient bazaars, and there's people that are dressed like from hundreds of years ago. And then when you travel in the European side, people are dressed like they are in Paris or Rome or Manhattan. Very, very modern. But our
You,
episode today is
yeah,
Moscow,
no, you
right?
mentioned Rome. That's where I'd like to transition to Moscow, because when we spoke about London and how it was a Roman settlement, and you know that Kremlin was actually built by Romans or by Italians. By Italians, yeah, the Italian architecture came in 15th century, I guess, to Moscow to build the Kremlin. Did you know that?
What century were they there?
I guess it was
15th?
15th, the end of 15th century. It means um, 1480,
Yeah,
80 something.
yeah. No, I didn't know that. I thought Russian stuff was built by Russians.
Well, that's where you were wrong. It was built by Italians. And it was
Yeah, but
initially, it was, well, there's a fun fact. I always knew that the Kremlin was, I thought it was built white, but I was wrong, because it was built red, exactly the same. It looked exactly the same way it looks now. But then they
oh,
started to painting it in white, and our cover shot actually shows the Kremlin in, I guess, in 18th century when its walls was white, and I liked it very much. I like it uh, more than red, even. God forbid.
well, I think that the color red and the color white are associated with Moscow and Russia and USSR. I mean, I know those are all different kinds of things, but I'm saying in the West, to Americans, I'm an American. When I think about Moscow, I'm thinking of you know St. Basil's Cathedral and the Red Square and you know giant statues, and then I'm always thinking loosely like Tsar life and the Bolshoi ballet and Diaghilev and just like the ballet russe, and just like it's a whole you know just cluster of ideas that just kind of like swarm into my head. So when you just like when I said the word London to you, like all kinds of memories and associations come in. But when you look at that painting that's on our cover shot, what sort of things are you thinking? You're saying it used to be red, now it's white. What else are you thinking when you think of Moscow?
I'm thinking, how could somebody go to Russia from Italy in the 15th century, really? Because it was such a long way, and the country was probably considered hostile and uncharted mostly. And then you have to come here and build this wonderful Kremlin, which still stands. Actually, the funny thing is that it's still functioning. It's the only fortress, I guess, from the past which is still functioning. All of them are museums,
Wow.
like the Tower of London, like White Tower, or Tower of London in London. It's a museum, really, right? But the
Well,
Russians,
like the palace in Istanbul is Topkapi Saray. Topkapi Saray is now a museum, but it was once a fortress. And I'm interested in words and the origin of words, and I just know that I don't speak Russian, but the word Kremlin roughly translates to castle or citadel, and it's not only a fortress, but it's like a whole world of tunnels and rooms and towers and things like that.
yeah. I I love living in Moscow. It's a beautiful city. Uh, but there are many things that bugs me anyway sometimes, because as I said before, wherever you go, there you are. If you're a tourist, it's one thing. If you have to live day-to-day life, it's totally the other. You have to think of job and accommodation, all that
Traffic.
stuff. Traffic is awful. But God forbid that's not supposed to be said, but I'm thankful to the COVID-19 thing, because it's just the traffic was wonderful for these 2 weeks we've been on lockdown. It's like I'll never be able to forget that. And when
The lack of traffic. The lack of
there
traffic.
was none basically. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Yeah, I mean, I drove around Dallas during the lockdown, and I love to take photographs of old buildings and architectural details. And I just had a great time with my camera, just driving around. Like downtown Dallas, you can't drive because there's like cabs and there's cars and there's trucks and there's people. It's just like well, it's not like Manhattan, but it is busy. And if I'm ever driving through there, I can never like stop for a second. Even when you at the stoplight, people are crossing and running back and forth. But it was just great to I kind of liked being in what I call the abandoned city. Just imagine going to all your favorite cities and there were no people there. You could just like walk around and explore.
yeah,
Is
maybe
that a
we're both a little bit shut in, because like in London, I told you that I'd like walk over the city of London in the weekends, because there was no one inside. It was deserted. Listen, do you know that Moscow, like we mentioned, that Paris and London and Istanbul. Okay, Paris and London, which are seen as at the main European cities. Do you think Moscow is a European city? Because from my point of view, and it's so far away from Europe, it's barely considered European.
Well, I think that when to answer that question, there is what I call highbrow and lowbrow. Highbrow is the educated people, and lowbrow are the uneducated. So when highbrow people think about Moscow, Paris, Berlin, Frankfurt, if you're part of the intellectual world, then you would think of it as being sophisticated and modern. So part of highbrow culture is to look at these cities, like going to London, like, oh, I want to see something about the Tower of London. I want to read about the history. And like, if I go to Moscow, I already know what I want to see. So, when you ask, is it European? I just know that as part of an intelligent, group of people who've done a little reading, maybe gone to college or something like that, what we see is kind of what we're looking for. Like a couple of years ago, this bestseller came out, A Gentleman in Moscow by Tolles, and it was a bestseller, but actually the dude had a previous bestseller and he lives in Manhattan. So if you're living in Manhattan and you already got one bestseller, shouldn't be too hard to get a second one. But back to Moscow, I don't think that most people think of Russia as part of Europe. It's like part of some like bizarro time capsule where there's you know KGB people driving around in like
Really?
black cars.
Even
Yeah,
even considering Saint Petersburg, for instance, it was the capital of the Russian Empire for a long time, and Saint Petersburg is European.
well, no one knows that. We don't know that. We don't
Maybe
know
I'm
that.
wrong. Maybe it's just
No, no,
me.
I'm no, no, no. I'm saying what you think people think about Russia and Moscow is different because you live on the inside. What I know about Dallas and Manhattan is different because I live on the inside. Like when I'm thinking about Moscow and Russia, you know, I I'm thinking people are drinking vodka, they have coats on, they're hurrying around, they're all carrying maybe Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or Chekhov under their overcoat. Their kids are named things like Boris, and maybe they're eating borscht, and they're you know there's bells ringing, and maybe like the lowbrow. What do they call these guys who stand around, like they come from the provinces and they like stand around garbage cans and drink vodka and do funny Russian dances? What do they call, like gopniks or something like that?
Like homeless
You know that
people?
word? No, it's like little thugs.
Uh,
Um,
well, there aren't many, but yeah, Gopnik is a kind of strange word. It's a little bit outdated, but maybe not. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but yeah, Gopnik is. I'm surprised you know that.
well, I mean that's what people think about. Like it's they're wearing these little hats, these little jumpsuits. They're like uneducated. They're smoking cigarettes. They're doing vodka shots. They don't have very good jobs, so they came from the land into the big city. So whenever anybody comes from the land into the big city, like in Dallas, there's people that have come to Dallas from other like small towns and stuff. They're not that educated, but like in general, when people would think about Russia, they're thinking about like Siberia and like everything's cold, and maybe they saw Murder on the Orient Express. Like it's not very
I
updated.
don't think it's much colder than Chicago, for instance, or Canada. If you lived in Canada, it's pretty much the same, I guess. Well, maybe there are little differences, but when you think of Russia as cold, that's not true. And also, you
Yeah,
mean
well,
speaking of cold, you mentioned all that wonderful thing like borscht and things from the past. I immediately think of Anna Karenina when they went skating in Moscow, because there are lots of ice skating parks in the winter because it's cold.
oh, really?
And
Nice.
and also tube stations. I love it. Tube stations is when I went back from London, the only thing I
Tube? You
admired
mean like a subway
subway
station? Subway?
stations. They call it
Oh, we
tube
call you
In
call it
England, but
a
here, yeah,
tube
in America
station.
probably subway station, and in Moscow it's metro. We call it metro,
Hmm.
and it's absolutely beautiful. In London, there are always delays, and it's hard to get in because so many people. Well, not surprisingly, it's the oldest, I guess, in the world. But in Moscow, it's modern and developed and functioning just precisely like Swiss clock. So if you ever go to Moscow, just you'll be able to judge my words by yourself.
Oh no, no. I know that if I ever go to Moscow, like one of my like on the bucket list is to fly into Moscow. Well, maybe like go to Paris, then go into Moscow, but do the train from Moscow to St. Petersburg and to go through the subways because I love subway stations. Like I've always thought that if I wasn't buried in San Antonio where my ancestors are buried, I would love to be buried in Grand Central Station in Grand Central Station in New York because it's like made from marble and there's beautiful little boutiques in there. And it's just like there's art all over the place and murals on the walls. But I have seen some pictures of the subway stations in Moscow, and they're just like fabulous. Like there's
Yeah,
tile
and
work and there's
y-
Tiffany glass and
yeah, they're beautiful. And the most important part, it works. It works and it serves its purpose. Also, you mentioned the train from Moscow to St. Petersburg. There is a new one, like bullet train. It's not a bullet train, but
oh,
it's quite fast. It's quite very convenient compared to, I think, the plane. If you're taking the plane, um, so it takes you 4 hours to get from Moscow to St. Petersburg and back if you want to.
4 hours.
4 hours exactly. Not, I mean, it's very convenient from the very center of Moscow. You can get ticket and go to St. Petersburg. But keep in mind, just don't everyone speaks English. Almost no one speaks English to be exact. So probably you'll have to learn a few Russian words as well.
Really? Well, I had some friends here in Dallas, some people from the church that I belong to, who went to Moscow for about 10 days, and they came back and they said that they didn't even need to know Russian at all. Everybody spoke English because everyone was speaking English to them because they were going to all the big sites and tourist places, and people spoke English, English,
Um,
French, or German. That's
yeah,
just what
maybe I'm
they
wrong.
speak.
Maybe in the tourist places they do speak. Maybe I'm wrong.
But yeah, like, well, I just know when I went to Paris the first time, I was a teenager and I had been studying French and I was so excited. And I walked into a little patisserie and I was going to order a little croissant or something. And I was like so excited. I've been studying French, I've been reading French. I'm like just like have a big grin on my face. And I walk up and talk to this fellow behind the counter and I explained what I wanted in French. He goes, "You're an American." And I said, "Mais oui, je suis américaine." And then, and then he just started speaking to me in English. It really made me sad because I was trying to practice my French. But I think the natives recognize tourists, and they just kind of really they don't even really like us. Like the French really don't like Americans. The French are like so snotty.
Hmm.
Excusez-moi.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that's all I know. Excusez-moi in French. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, I I don't know if speaking of languages and all, it's probably very different from the US being here because there are many different ethnicities, but very few black people. And I know that might be surprisingly, maybe I know stressful, a little bit stressful to you, but
It's stressful to me.
maybe I shouldn't have said that. But really,
Why
there
am I
aren't many.
I'm
Because
not.
you're accustomed to I don't know to the US diversity, and there isn't
But I mean,
much.
I didn't really spend most of my time in the United States. I've spent more time out of the United States. I lived in Germany, I lived in Turkey, I've lived in Guam, I've lived in all kinds of different cities all over the United States. I mean, I've been to
Turkey,
all over the
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that um in Dallas everything is really quite segregated. Like big rich neighborhoods are many of them are primarily white or maybe partially Asian.
Is there a Chinatown
Southeast.
in Dallas?
Yeah, there's places where all the Chinese vendors, the import shops are. There's also certain areas where there's like wealthy Indians. There's also a Russian Orthodox. There's a Russian Orthodox church not far from where my church is, and then there's also a really big one that I've never been to that has a restaurant and a cultural center next to it, and they teach Russian classes and Russian dancing, and they do all the festivals, and they sell all whatever you do during the Christmas season. Like, what's the Christmas season in Russia? It's not in December, it's in
Well,
January. What is it?
The Christmas time, yeah. It's I think it's the first Sunday in January, or well, it seventh. Basically, I say it 7th January through 7th through 11th maybe of January. Not
Oh,
unlike 24th of December. And
okay.
you mentioned that Constantinople. It's how it was called before, Byzantine,
Well,
Byzantium.
Anatolia, no, well, Anatolia is the vast land that extends. Extends up into the steppe region of the Caucasus area, and so Anatolia is the land. So the real people of Turkey are Anatolian. They're people from the land, and then as people move towards the city, uh, Constantinople. Okay, well, Constantinople is the Christian Byzantine center, and then when Ataturk in the 1930s, got rid of all he got a Western uh, alphabet and told people they can't wear their fez and women can go to university. Then it became called Istanbul, but Byzantium and Constantinople, these are different names for the city
Yeah,
built on the Bosphorus. Yeah.
I mentioned this because there is a concept of third Rome, and if there is a third, the first Rome was probably Rome. The second was Constantinople. Is that right?
Yes, because Constantinople, it was the capital of the Roman Empire in 330.
What do you
It,
say
it
if
it's
Moscow? Do you think it's Moscow could be the third Rome because of that theory?
Well, I think Moscow would like to be the third.
Yeah, but what would,
I don't.
where do you see
No,
the
I'm
third
just
Rome? If like
no.
if it was up to you, where would you place it?
The third Rome.
Uh
Well,
huh.
Roman. Okay, it has to be empire. So I'm all about like Tsar Nicholas and like all the Tsar stuff. Like I'm all gaga on that. So
Also, it's
yeah,
about empire.
yeah, it's about
Oh.
empire. So to me, like Roman Empire, Ottoman Empire, there has to be courts and there has to be the czar, the king, the queen, lots of golden robes and like incense and
Mm.
pageantry and lots of rules and corruption and I mean there's also the expression, that was completely Byzantine, which means like if something is Byzantine, it's like, just shrouded in mystery and like intrigue. So the word Byzantine, yeah, I mean, yeah, I can see that Moscow as part of the czarist world, like the empire, all the empire stuff
Mm.
would make it go there. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just again, I like this stuff. Wherever you go, there you are. Whether it's first, second, or third.
Well, I'm pretty sure that when people settled in the United States, it was colonial. They were colonies of Great Britain, and there was the city of York in England, and then some people said, well, let's be New York, New York,
Mm-hmm.
or there was Jersey. Someone wants to be New Jersey. So this idea of the old world and the new world, like America has always been called the new world, the new empire, and now Americans are flexing their muscle all over the world, with a lot of imperial conquests and keeping busy in other countries and sucking up their resources. So the idea of empire, yeah, I think the Russian Empire and the Roman Empire, Ottoman Empire, they were all about gaining more land, gaining more money, acquisition, stuff like that.
Moscow had little in common with Rome, unfortunately. So,
How's that?
in
It has
terms,
little in common.
yeah,
It has castles. It has like a
nothing. It
king.
has nothing like this, I guess, except for the
It
Kremlin.
doesn't have. If I just said it had the Kremlin.
Yeah, but Kremlin is the only one, and if you go to Rome, it's totally different. I don't know how to explain that. The east versus
Well,
west.
well, the thing is, like Rome is a collapsed empire, and modern Romans are living on top of rubble. You know, Russia has vast land, vast land. I mean, when I took my first course in like Russian literature, like the guy was just like lost on the word Mother Russia. Like he was like in a hypnotic trance lecturing on Mother Russia and how important the land is, like the vast resources of Russia. Italy is like cramped.
Makes me think of Alaska.
Alaska.
Makes me think of Alaska. Yeah, you mentioned the land and how part of it was lost, and I've never been in Alaska, but still I somehow feel like I've been deprived of something. I don't know,
You
important.
want to come to you want to come to Alaska?
Not
Didn't you
that
say
I
that
wanna,
Alaska
not
once
that I wanna go to Alaska. I want this to be part of Russia,
yeah,
which you don't.
part of your
And whoever
imperialist
lives there, they don't
desires.
want. Probably, yeah.
No,
No, it used to
really.
be
Like
Russian. It was sold to the U.S.
Alaska was Russia?
You didn't know that? Tell me you're kidding.
No, we don't know that. Alaska
Tell me you're
is
kidding.
some.
Honestly, it was
No,
Russian.
listen
It
it.
was Russian Empire,
Just
part of Russian territory. You didn't
just
know that?
listen. Escúchame. That's. Do you understand Spanish? Escúchame. Okay. So, so what we learn in school is that Alaska was once connected to a land mass, and when the continental drift drifted, then Alaska became Alaska, and then what it was connected to is just kind of like back over there. So people are like always talking about the Bering Strait and how civilization came marching across the Bering Strait, but we never ever learn in school, either in elementary, middle, high school, or college, anything about Russia. Like American education is not very hip on promoting anything Russian.
But
The history
that's
books
not
are
about
written.
being Russian on America. It's about history. also, it can be.
Yeah, but history is whoever writes the books, and I'm
Right.
saying whoever writes the American textbooks in America have never been. I'm just saying, as I grew up in an American school system and went to an American university, I never heard anything about Russia. Now, I've heard about the French owned all of this thing that they called the Louisiana Purchase. All the land west of the Mississippi used to belong to France. And during the time of, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, he signed a treaty with someone like, hey, we're going to go ahead and buy that because we want all this land. So, the whole idea of land and acquisition and stuff like that. But I had never really heard that it was part of Russia. I heard that the land mass was connected somewhere. But how
No,
is it
no,
part of
just
Russia?
just read about Alaska Purchase. It's I guess it's very much the same as Louisiana Purchase. Yeah, it was the Russian empire, part of Russian Empire, and the United States acquired it from Russia, I guess in 19th century.
Huh. Well,
I'm
maybe we
surprised
need
you
to
didn't
write
know that. It's like we don't
what you
specifically
were going to.
learn told that, but everybody knows it.
Not everybody knows that. What you think that Americans know is what you know. You don't even know what we know.
Yeah, but I'm not lying. You can look it up later or just Google
No,
it.
no,
Alaska Alaska
no. But
Purchase.
my point is that what you assume that everyone knows is not. People are informed by what is put in front of them. So
Mm.
back to our first episode of Tabula Rasa, when school children come to school, they are taught an American curriculum. There's American books written by American authors or Texas histories written by Texans, and whoever writes the book tells the story. And we learn that the Bering Strait is some land that separates, Alaska from what used to be, you know, a
Yeah,
land mass. It's hardly ever mentioned. It's called a land mass,
that's part of
and
the
it.
story. Yeah.
And I'm just saying that we as Americans don't really learn much about that it was Russian. And if you think about like the space race and all that, Americans are not interested in giving Russians any credit for anything. So I think there's some.
You mentioned space, and the higher you get, the beautiful the Earth seems to be, and we all living on the same planet, which is small and fragile. But we somehow been here on the ground. We forget about that stuff.
That's true. Well, that's why in Patroma Therapy, we are here to educate ourselves and any interested folks that want to listen. Well, as we're kind of moving towards the end of this episode, what would you hope that people would know about Moscow? Were you born in Moscow?
No, I moved here 25 years ago, 20 years ago. Like we had a World Soccer Cup. Is that how you call football? Soccer Cup?
Let's call the soccer. Yeah, everybody knows it's
Yeah.
called the
And
World
there,
Cup. They call
like
it
World Cup, yeah,
Yeah.
it was extremely successful. People from all over the world visited Moscow, and that's what I like for the people the world know about Moscow, that they visit it more often and see it for themselves.